So even if you did not vaccinate, you would have wild types,
Yes,
and you would probably have not one wild type in your farm. There's what you call quasi-species. So they are slightly different, all of them.
Hello, welcome to this edition of Meet the Expert, a new series of podcasts on swine disease management in practice presented by Boehringer Ingelheim. My name is Peter Best. So, Dr. Rathkjen, would you say then that vaccination immediately comes into the frame? You've described the stabilizing of the sow herd and so on. So you are assuming there is no vaccination taking place already at this site, and that vaccination should begin, or should we be changing the vaccination? What are we saying at this that relation?
I think most of Europe, US, Asia, most of sows are always already vaccinated. So I would say more than 80% of sows are probably vaccinated. The question is more, are they following a strict scheme on that? What we recommend, and that's not only us, it's a general recommendation to vaccinate the sows every 3 to 4 months. So that part is quite easy, I would say, if you're doing that. The tricky part here is in vaccination and immunization is the gilts. So gilts play a big role here, how you introduce your gilts. So if you're following your vaccination scheme on the sows, and then you should be able to have a stable sow herd. What you struggle with here is the gilts that come in as a susceptible animal, first of all. If they're not immunized probably before they go into the sow herd, they could be susceptible to the virus. Or if they were infected closely or shortly before they're introduced, they could bring the virus in and reintroduce it into the sows. So the gilts play an important part, and what we recommend is to immunize the gilts, start the immunization of the gilts at least 12 weeks before they're introduced into the sow herds, by a vaccination, so we are sure that they're properly immunized and also had a chance to clear the virus before they go in. Actually, we recommend 2 vaccinations, so 1 vaccination 12 weeks and 1 8 weeks before introduction, and a quarantine period of 12 weeks.
Is this standard practice in your experience now that sow herd owners recognize this with their gilt replacement policies, or are there some really frequently occurring gaps as far as that's concerned?
Unfortunately, that is not a common practice, and probably the best reason, or it's not a good reason, but at least it's very often the reason, is that having a gilt pool just for 12 weeks that has some space demand, and in order to save space, you want maybe only to have gilts for 8 weeks or even shorter before you introduce it. Worst case, you purchase your gilts and you introduce them directly into the sow herd. In that case, you have no chance to immunize them, and you have no chance to cool them down or to make sure that they're not bringing virus into the farm. And so this is a really, really dangerous behavior. We know that if you can bring in gilts, not too often, so maybe every 3 to 4 months, that allows PRRS virus in your farm to cool down. And if you then can put your gilts into a quarantine, you have a much higher chance to give birth to PRRS virus negative piglets, which is the first thing you have to do. If you're not able to do that, you have no chance to handle your PRRS virus later in the system.
But you talked about whole herd vaccination. So what other parts of the herd are you going to be vaccinating that you weren't vaccinating before? Is it right the way through, or is there some particular stage you would look at?
Yeah, the other part of the whole herd is the piglets or the growing pigs. And there, unfortunately, we see that there's much less vaccination taking place. So, and that is a really big pool. So let's say today, when we have 12, 15, 17, some cases 18, 20 live-born piglets, we would have between 10 and 20 times as many animals as growing animals. We know when they become virus infected, they are viremic for way longer than the sows. We also know that they have a virus replication that is way higher. So if we're not handling them well, we have a huge pool of PRRS virus here that is able to spread and infect back to your sow herd or to your gilts or whatever. So if we are not probably handling these animals and vaccinate them as well, and that was the last part of the whole herd, then we are creating this huge pool of PRRS virus just circulating around. And because the number of animals here is way higher than your sows, then you're really having a huge number of PRRS.
Do you think it's a consideration of the cost of vaccination that people are not doing this already with their weaned pigs, their grown pigs?
I'm sure costs play a big part here. So very often we hear that farmers or vets do not see the value of the vaccination here because it's hard to measure. And maybe, first of all, to measure the value, you really have to measure something. So you have to measure the growth of your pigs. You have to measure if they are coughing and so on. But that is the direct value, the benefit of vaccination. But the indirect benefit of vaccination is reducing the amount of virus that is circulating in your farm. And that is even harder to measure. So what we hear, the reason, the cost, but the cost is linked to the perceived lack of value or of the vaccination.
But PRRS is routinely described as the most economically important disease of the swine industry globally. I mean, even the direct cost, presumably, would be more than enough to justify a vaccination policy, wouldn't it?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And this is, I think this is a philosophic question that is even harder to answer.
But I'm wondering if, PRRS has been around so long, have people got sort of blasé about it? PRRS, we know, has been around, is nothing new, and we'll continue doing what we're doing. Whereas, in fact, what you're describing is a constantly changing situation. The whole reason for sequencing is, that we're getting more and more variants of the virus coming out, and we're seeing a greater variety of clinical signs and combinations with other pathogens.
Yeah, this is, and actually there may be another reason that is triggering this. So because you hear that the virus is mutating or recombining all the time, so it's a moving target, is that a reason to do vaccination? Because it's escaping all the time anyway. So what can I do? It will just be changing. But I would say it's absolutely the opposite. This is actually probably the best reason to vaccinate. The only virus or the only PRRS virus you would know exactly how it looks like would be the virus that comes from a vaccine. So that would continuously be the same that you put in there. So that's the only chance actually to control what's going on. So if you're using the same vaccines in your sow and in your growing pigs, then you have a chance to control what is actually going on. If you just leave it open to the virus to mutate and recombine, it will be a constantly moving target. So you have a chance to go backwards and say, we can at least put something in here that can fight what is going on with the wild types that are circulating. Okay. And it's not something that just happens over a week or a month. You have to do this continuously.
Sure. But recombination, I mean, I don't actually know. Is mutation and recombination the same thing as far as the PRRS vaccine is concerned, or they're two completely different things?
Small mutations is happening every time PRRS virus replicate, yes, because it's had what you call, it's lacking a proofreading. So when it replicates and create another virus, it's not comparing with the previous one. It just put out a new one.
So then
Small errors.
Any copy choices.
Yeah. There's small. So if you have a typewriter and you are trying to write exactly what you had before, you have small slashes that are wrong, but you don't correct it. You can read it anyway. It works still. But recombination would actually be more or less take the pages from two different books and put these together, and then you have something completely new. And recombination has. We have to understand that recombination is something that is very common, but we probably didn't know how common it was before we start to look into more than just OF5. When we started to look into the other open reading frames, we realized that PRRS virus do this happily.
Do they do it more than other viruses, recombine, I mean? Other RNA viruses.
Then RNA viruses like to do this, but other viruses like influenza virus, in influenza virus we call it reassortment.
Yes.
And I think that's well known that it's also happy to take parts from other viruses. It probably even happens way more often than we think of, because most of these recombinants, as we call them, they're not viable. So they would die. But a few of them are successful, and all of a sudden we have a new virus circulating.
Now, this is a highly significant event, recombination, or is it academic interest, in fact, if I may be blunt?
It's probably mostly academically of academic interest. Scientists, they seem to love this. A lot of research money is put into it, and they also love to publish studies about recombinants. But now and then we see recombinants coming out that all of a sudden they turn out to be highly virulent, and then it's not just of research interest. Then it's really something practical that is affecting.
But recombination does not necessarily result in more or less virulence, does it? It's as you've described, it's just happened. Some of these copies are not proofread and they happen to be more virulent.
Most of the time you wouldn't even recognize it, and you wouldn't see it. So most of the time there would be basically no difference in virulence and pathogenicity. But now and then we see a completely new virus.
So if I were to be a field vet or a farmer, should I care about recombination? Are there practical reasons I should be more aware of it than I am?
I would only care about it if I'm trying to find out where my virus came from. So if I have an introduction of a PRRS virus into my farm, then I want to sequence it and compare it with others, and then I would care about it. On a daily basis, handling PRRS in your farm, controlling it, I wouldn't care about it. It's not affecting the way you're acting to control PRRS anyway.
You are listening to Meet the Expert, a new series of podcasts on swine disease management in practice presented by Boehringer Ingelheim. If you would like to know more about the subject we're discussing in this podcast, additional information is available offline. So just to go back on that, if I may, the situation where it might be of interest is if you've got a particular circumstance or a situation that you're unable to describe in other ways. And so recombination might be part of that story that you want to investigate. But if you've discovered that recombination is giving you your situation, can you physically do anything about it?
You can only do what you would have to do anyway. So vaccinate, immunize your animals, and control your pig flow and your management. That's what you can do. You cannot do anything about recombination. You cannot undo it or reverse it.
But vaccination, you say, recombination won't take place in a vaccinated herd?
Oh,
or
yeah.
It does take place, but...
It takes place everywhere. And probably the most well-known recombinants are recombinations between two vaccines, which also happens. And why is that so? It's not because that recombination between two vaccines happens more often, but it's because with vaccines, we know exactly how they look like in all the genome. So we have, you could say, we have the two books
Yes.
in front of us. So now we can compare each sentence and see
Yes.
where it came from.
Yes.
If we have a wild types recombine all the time as well. But you don't have the books. You don't know. You don't know the combination of letters here.
Yes.
So you're not able to detect it. Then you can find recombinants where you have a vaccine and a wild type, because at least now one of the parents or one of the books is in front of you, so you can see where it's diverting from that book. So that's how you discover recombinants. So recombinants takes place all the time when you have more than one virus replicating in a cell at the same time. Then they can share, you can say, pages or parts of the virus.
But in my non-veterinary terms, vaccinating isn't adding to the situation in a way you don't want by making another virus available for recombination. It's being more helpful. It's not being counterproductive even at that level.
Exactly. So even if you did not vaccinate, you would have wild types,
Yes,
and you would
yes.
probably have not one wild type in your farm. There's what you call quasi-species. So they are slightly different, all of them. So, and the also in a farm, the virus is mutating over time and diverting, and that could be recombining again. Or you could have an introduction of a virus from outside.
Yes.
What I'm saying here is that when you use a vaccine, you know exactly what you put into the farm.
Right.
And you have a chance to at least immunize all the piglets with exact the same virus in order to control.
And
It's
the good news is, I suppose, that all the evidence, the vaccine is protective regardless of the type, regardless of the identity of those viruses that you identify.
It's well known that PRRS vaccines are not protecting animals from getting infected later on. So it's helping them to fight the PRRS virus faster and to have a lower level of PRRS virus when they are infected. It's not preventing them from being infected later on in their life, and they can also have a replication. But since you have a lower number of replication, a lower number of viruses, and the duration is shorter, of course that is also reducing the chance that you would then have a recombination.
Yes.
But you're not completely protected from getting infected from vaccination.
Yes. Yeah.
That's for sure.
But it's certainly true that regardless of the type of virus you're looking at, you are getting effective protection from using the vaccine.
Yeah, you reduce the duration of the replication of a wild type, and you reduce the amount of it. So that's already giving you a better chance to control a recombination.
Right.
But very often the most interesting recombinants that has been described from researchers are involving vaccines. And I don't know, that's probably because it's like the popular press or whatever, it is hot news, or because it's not more interesting than when wild types are recombining. But if you don't know the wild types, you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, but it's the same story.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, just different characters. Dr. Rathkjen, thank you very much for this. That's been fascinating. You have been listening to a Meet the Expert podcast presented by Boehringer Ingelheim. Please note that other podcasts in the series are becoming available. Stay tuned and thank you for listening.